Presto to our top story for Thursday morning. Victims of the Post Office Horizon scandal have been told they can be swiftly exonerated and compensated under a new law to be introduced by the government.
Describing the scandal as one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our nation's history, the Prime Minister also announced an upfront payment of £75,000 to many of those affected.
TalkTV's chief political commentator Peter Cardwell is here. Pete, great to see you for Thursday morning. I mean, this is just like a juggernaut that won't go away. We've seen this ITV drama come out. We've seen this gather pace. Paula Vanel's the ex-CEO handing back her CBE. They're now talking about trying to get her pension pot back. Sir Ed Davey blamed, lots of people implicated. And I have to say, when Sunak stood up yesterday, that was great. And we'll talk about the implications of that. But even more, I just want to start with this, front of the Telegraph. Rosie showed me this morning. Post Office handed out bonuses for convictions. So if you work for the Post Office, I'd say to you, if you can do a couple, Pete, I'll give you 500 quid. It's appalling, man.
It is appalling. And there was a security expert who was working for the Post Office for 12 years. He talked about how that framed his work. There's email evidence. There's so many things coming to light now. Talking about postmasters and postmistresses all being, as one person put it, crooks. That is absolutely not the case. That is factually wrong. And there's so much about this that is still to come out. But yes, yesterday, bowing to political pressure, Rishi Sunak saying that people would get at least £75,000 as an interim payment. There are people who will get up to £600,000, if not more. But of course, for the cost of your business, your home, perhaps even your marriage. Reputation gone. What price can you put on that?
A lot of this should happen fairly swiftly. For those sub-postmasters, what can they expect in the next year? It's having their name cleared and compensation. That's
right. It's tricky for a few of them who have perhaps gone to the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal has denied their appeal. But in general, there's going to be a blanket measure basically put in by the government by the end of the year with those £75,000 payouts to the vast majority of people who have been affected by this. It'll go some way to sorting out, but in terms of sorting it out overall, that will take a lot longer.
Let's put this in layman's terms for people, because Rosie and I were talking about this morning and she knows far more about this. But I spent yesterday saying, come on, you're the government, just bring in a law, exonerate these people, pay them the money. But there is, of course, in this country, in this democracy, a difference between the elected government and our legal system. And you touched upon there that some are in the Court of Appeal. My mindset was, why would you want to put these poor people through this again? But some still want their day in court, don't they?
Yes, they do. And it's interesting because you can essentially sign a piece of paper to say you've done nothing wrong, which these vast majority of these people have, and get your compensation. Or you can go further and go for an individualised kind of determination of how much money that you get. Now, if it's a fairly straightforward thing, people might just sign the piece of paper and say, OK, I'll take the standard. It's over, move on. Exactly, Rosie. Whereas other people would say, well, actually, hold on a second. I went bankrupt, or there were particular allegations against me. This is really, really complicated, and I think it's going to go on for some years to come as well. But this is a sort of, as much as it can be, a quick fix for the majority of people who are involved with this, but there are some cases that will go on for years.
There are also some cases, and this is why there's this tension between what the government can do and the legal system.
Yeah, absolutely.
When, en masse, you say, right, we're going to clear all these people's names, inevitably there will be. We have no idea, and they were talking about this yesterday in Parliament. We can't say, oh, it's 99% of these cases where it was all a wrong conviction. You know, we know there may be some people who were guilty in that mix, and that's why legally it's then complicated to say, we know that could be the case, but we're going to say all of you have your names cleared.
You're absolutely right, Rosie, and that's where this signed declaration comes in, where people say, look, I didn't break the law at all, there was no problem. So if people go back on that, they can lose their compensation, for example. Now, we're probably dealing with a very, very small number of people, because the vast majority of people who've been caught up in this have done absolutely the right thing the whole way through. But the government has to safeguard itself. That's one of the very few times where the legislative process, Parliament essentially, has overruled the legal system. So it's complicated, but it's also almost unprecedented in British legal history.
Can I ask you both? I've just picked up on something's age. There are people within this that are guilty, you're saying?
They don't know. Ultimately, all these people were convicted of being guilty, and we think the vast, vast, vast majority of them
I thought they
were wrongly convicted. But it means if there was a sub-postmaster who was stealing, who is now caught up in this scandal, it's an opportunity for them to say, well, I'll have my name cleared and I was guilty. Now, that could be the tiniest percentage. That's why legally it's complicated, because they have to say, without going through and giving everyone an individual trial again, the time, the cost of that, the trauma to all these people who've had their lives ruined, basically the cost of saying, OK, a couple, maybe, we don't know, of guilty people will be exonerated is far better than the absolutely devastating situation all these other people have been in.
And you're absolutely right, Rosie, they can go back and look at some of those cases again. But for the majority of people, this is in some way solved, moving towards that position.
I was reading in the Sun today, 24 years, 700 wrongful prosecutions, 4 suicides, and it took an ITV drama to bring this to people's
Well, that's a mini
attention.
scandal within itself, Jeremy, in that this scandal has gone on for 25 years, and finally the government is doing something about it.
Rishi Sunak, let's make it political. Yesterday, obviously, stood up, first Prime Minister's cushion time. How was it? Was it for a nerd? Did it excite you?
It was okay. I mean, it was
okay.
Certainly, he spoke. There was a planted question from Lee Anderson at the start, so Rishi Sunak could talk about Post Office Horizon and what they were going to do, and then later on there was something called an urgent question, a little debate that happened where the Post Office Minister put out much more information about it. PMQs mostly between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak was about Rwanda. That's going to be the massive dominating issue next week, especially on Tuesday and Wednesday. When
I read that Starmer sort of avoided the Post Office scandal. Is this because he was the Director of Public Prosecutions at all?
Possibly, but also for 5 years within that time from 2008 to 2013. But also because they largely agree. There's not a huge amount of disagreement, and I think when the government puts forward this legislation, Labour will scrutinise it, of course, as they always do, but they'll probably just vote for it.
No sign of Sir Ed Davey in the Commons?
He wasn't in the House of Commons yesterday. He had a legitimate personal reason not to be there, but he's still under a lot of political pressure, and people saying now that Paula Venels has handed back her CBE, people are saying perhaps he should hand back his 90.
They want a pension pot now, don't they?
Yeah, indeed, and
it's not going to stop.
It's not going to stop, and there's so many people who are implicated in this in terms of who. It wasn't just who did what when, it was who knew what when and who covered up what.
And there is currently a public inquiry.
No, what, when, what?
There's a public inquiry into exactly what went wrong at the post office. Stage 4 of that starts again today. We'll have a bit more detail on that.